Matthias, can you unmute yourself? Matthias, can you unmute and speak?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
But who is going to make the presentation, Matthias or Tess?
Both. They will share the presentation.
Ah, okay. So my initial comments will be very brief.
Yes, that's fine, no problem. Namsook, are you ready with the presentation?
Matthias will make presentation.
And who's putting it up?
Matthias will.
Okay, so
Deb?
Yes.
No, not Tess. Deb is asking floor. But since you're not speaking right now, I will give you the floor later when the time comes. Thank you. Because there is a limit of people who can be streaming. So bear with me. So I can see the screen now. This is from Matthias, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think you can go ahead.
okay, Jose Antonio, if you allow me, I will open the meeting and then give you the floor. Good afternoon, everybody. I think that many of you were in an earlier session, so I'm happy to see you stayed on for this very important session on everything the committee discussed during the week about numerous LDC-related issues. I'm happy to count on an excellent team with us today, and let me briefly introduce them to you. It's again, thank you very much, Professor Jose Antonio Ocampo, the chair of the CDP, to be with us today, and also introduce two additional speakers this morning to you. One is our subgroup leader, as we refer within the CDP membership to particular groups that focus on certain areas and issues, Mr. Tafare Tesfaciu. And with Mr. Tesfaciu, we also have my colleague Matthias Bruckner from the CDP Secretariat. I will be moderating. My name is Roland Moleris. I'm the Secretary of the Committee for Development Policy. And with those opening words, I would like to invite the chair of the committee, Professor Jose Antonio Ocampo, to say a few opening remarks. Chair, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and of course, very happy to be with all of you. Although, as I say always, I hope next time it will be in the UN building, so as to see you all in this presentation of the case of LDCs. As Mr. Moleros already said, the main presentation is going to be by our subgroup leader, Mr. Tesfaciu, as well as the person in the secretariat that works much harder, very hard with other members of the secretariat on this issue, Mr. Brunker. Let me say that we have had three issues on LDC that have been discussed extensively by the CDP this week. The first one, which was also subject to a preparatory process in January, is the case of the countries that can graduate according to the criteria that has been adopted by CDP. So this was the subject of a whole week in January, and this week we basically came to the agreement to three countries, Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, and Nepal. The second is the follow-up or the monitoring, let's say, of the graduated and graduating countries, which is a process which CDP has been involved now for some time. So this was done in a very again, in a very extensive way with a background document that was actually quite well done. I would say in the case of the monitoring process, one idea that we agreed is that in the future we will look at crisis situations in more detail, including, of course, crises such as the current one, which is on health reasons, but also a crisis associated to economic issues. For example, the collapse of oil prices that led to the decision of the General Assembly to postpone the graduation of Angola, and some natural resource crises such as the 2015 earthquake in Nepal that led to the decision we took 3 years ago to postpone the graduation of Nepal. A third issue that we look at was the document that was requested by ECOSOC on the effects of COVID-19 on LDCs. And there will be a presentation. In the presentation, there will be details of the conclusions of that report, as perhaps you can say in a strictly terms of COVID cases and mortality, there probably was less effect on LDCs, but in terms of social impacts, they were severe, and in some cases also very severe economic impacts, associated to different things like fall of commodity prices, fall of exports, the interruption of tourism, which affected severely in some countries. And finally, let me say that we have discussed again our proposals for the next conference on LDC that will take place early next year, LDC 5. We do have some recommendations to reiterate our recommendation that productive capacity for sustainable development should be the framework for the next 10-year program of action for LDCs, but also some specific issues associated to lessons from this pandemic, which are associated to access to vaccine, to the health systems, to the digital divide, and other issues that will be presented by our two speakers. So with that, let me give the floor to Mr. Tesfaciu for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. Good morning, everyone. The presentation will be divided into 4 short parts. I will first deal with the decision made by the CDP regarding graduation, and then I'll touch on the monitoring of graduating and graduated countries, and also the proposals from CDP to the LDC 5 process. And my friend Matthias will then look at the impact of COVID-19 on LDC, the study conducted by CDP as a request of ECOSOC. And then he will also go through the 2021 triennial review of the LDC category. If we could go for.
Yes, thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So that would be now some of the technical aspects of the work. Quite part of the issues that were raised had already been discussed by the chair of the CDP, Jose Antonio Ocampo, and it's also been discussed in the session before. Sorry. So let's move into the main findings of the study. As already mentioned, so the COVID-19 pandemic spread less rapidly and less severely in LDC than in other countries. And what we found in the study that a key factor here has been effective policy responses by the LDCs. There are other reasons as well, but that was really highlighted. Many of the LDCs have done an excellent job in dealing with the health part. But as mentioned, the socioeconomic fallout has been devastating for LDC more than the health side, in particular the countries that LDCs that were dependent on tourism, that's first, and then also those that are dependent on fossil fuel exports. Others that are rely on more on remittances or that rely on manufacturing have also been hit, but to a lesser extent. Then the second big part of the fallout have been service reductions in health and education, caused both by the health pandemic themselves, by the response measures, and also by the international context. And those service reductions are expected to have long-term impacts, which is a key concern. And as already been raised generally for developing countries in this earlier session, limited fiscal space had been a key constraint to the response, and that's holds in particular for LDCs. We see that in developed countries, the size of fiscal stimulus per capita has been 580 times higher. Of course, for other developing countries would be more in between, but nevertheless, LDCs are particularly constrained there. So therefore, important support has been provided by development partners. That has been a welcome finding, but unfortunately, the support has been far below what is actually needed. And again, that has already been raised. We have seen for many LDCs, there's the debt service suspension initiative that has provided important short-term relief, provided additional fiscal space. However, it seemed to be clearly insufficient. We see LDCs still spend more on servicing debt than on strengthening the health sector, which of course is a priority during this pandemic. We also see, and it's important to note, the health crisis is not over, it's still evolving. That was one of the key issues and factors in the study. And we also know that the socioeconomic crisis will last even longer, even if the health crisis itself may be reduced in the foreseeable future. So overall, the big finding is there has been stalling or reversing with years of progress towards achieving the LDCs. And there are two important findings also in the study. One is most LDCs were not on track even before the crisis. And the CDP has actually raised that issue already, I believe, 3 years ago. So that, of course, the pandemic makes the situation even more critical. And the other key finding is that returning to a pre-COVID-19, and that's related to the fund, it's first of all, it's not feasible. The world has changed and is still changing. But second of all, it's also not advisable to return back to the time, because before the crisis, the world was not on track to meet the LDCs, to meet the SDGs. Now, briefly on the recommendation side, as already highlighted by Jose Antonio Ocampo, one big part, of course, are vaccines. It's a lot of call, a lot of recognition that these should be a global public good, but they should then also be treated as such. The COVAX initiative has been found to be very welcome, but it's also found to be insufficient. It's on scale, there are still resources needed from that, but it also would require to go beyond just the procurement of vaccines and the distribution of vaccine, but would require also involving global production structures here, and would require to address also constraints through intellectual property rights and other barriers to technology transfer. Now, with the specific aspects for LDCs, of course, then those should we get this vaccine at zero or at minimal cost, and in particular the LDC, the Agenda 2030 rightly highlighted the principle of reaching the furthest behind first. However, if we see the current projection are that LDCs are getting the vaccines at the last, which is a clearly problem and a violation of that principle. Then second bigger part is the scaling up support to public health system. Again, that's a broader one, of course, affecting many countries. As there have been found many successful experience among LDCs, sharing these experience should definitely be supported. Financing, you had already the great discussion just in the earlier session. Debt relief, strong debt relief is definitely needed for LDCs. It's also for other countries. What is clear for LDCs there, and those that are highly adapted LDCs, support to multilateral debt relief is important. And as well on the issue of enhancing financial support, we have the issue already raised before, the recapitalizing multilateral and regional development banks, issuing and using then the special drawing rights as explained before. In particular, for LDCs, it's a reiteration of the call. There should be grant as a primary modality for LDCs. And of course, the existing commitment needs to be implemented and steps to reach those targets have to be done very quickly. And then the CDP had also suggested there's a need for global insurance mechanism for this pandemic and also for the next pandemic, because as we've seen, that probably won't be the last one. And we have the glooming issue of climate risk. So for global insurance mechanisms to be developed, it's important that they include LDCs due to their limited fiscal capacity. They should participate in those schemes at no or at minimal cost. And then the third big block on recommendation moves towards the support to structural transformation for sustainable development in LDCs, as already highlighted and will be continued by Tess later. Expanding productive capacity is a key issue here. We have seen that the lack of personal protective equipment, other basic health products during the crisis had been the wake-up call. We have seen issues in the education sector where more efforts are needed, and that brings already to a big priority within that, and that's the digitalization. I think the world is speaking about the digital divide already for many, many years, but the current pandemic clearly highlighted the need to address that issue as a clearly priority. Second priority here that came out of the study is the need for investments in renewable energy, and there was a focus on powering up rural farms and also the informal sector. With this brief overview of the study, which of course will be then be accessible when it's finalized and published, let's move to the technical aspects of the triennial review that has been concluded as discussed. Just as a recap, I think most of the listeners and visitors will already know there are three criteria. It's the gross national income, it's the human asset index consisting of 6 different indicators, and the economic and environmental vulnerability index consisting of 8 indicators. The basic rules here are that a country for inclusion needs to meet all 3 criteria, and it must agree on that. Here the finding is, and that's for the first time since the concept of triennial reviews have been introduced in 1991, that no country found eligible for inclusion. We move to graduation. The rule is that a country has to pass graduation thresholds in 2 of the criteria, with the exception there's the so-called income-only rule. It's also important the country must meet criteria at 2 consecutive reviews. And in addition, I think there's an echo here. There is no automatism. So additional information is taken into account. It's not the case that the CDP only considers the LDC criteria. It considers specific additional information. Excuse me. So what is this information? First of all, who presented that? The CDP has introduced the concept of a CDP country rapporteur. Here you see the pictures that went through all this information that was available. Then there's a multitude of analytical documents that have been prepared by our colleagues at UNCTAD and by DESA. on the looking at the vulnerability of countries, looking at the graduation, looking at the impacts of graduation and providing an overall assessment. Then the additional information includes a country consultation. There had been meetings in countries. The UN team on the ground participated in this EGM, and most importantly, countries themselves, country representatives participated at the expert group meeting that had been held in January. And in addition, there had been the written country statement to the plenary that all of the countries that had been considered for a possible recommendation have provided. So what is the way forward on this specific information? The CDP highlighted that it will continue these additional parts like a country rapporteur graduation assessment and the country level meeting, in addition to the established procedures concerning the impact assessment, the country consultation, and the vulnerability profile. But that was not the only additional information. The Committee for Development Policy last year introduced the concept of supplementary graduation indicators, which provide a more broader picture on countries and issues that are relevant for graduation, but may not necessarily be required. And then importantly, and as already mentioned before, there has been the COVID-19 study that has been explicitly requested by the Council. So that has been also taken into account in the triennial review. But just to highlight, it was not the only way how the COVID-19 pandemic has been taken into account, because also these analytical documents, the country consultations, country statements, provide important information about the impacts of COVID-19 on least developed countries, how they relate to graduation. Now to the results. The first set of countries are those that are graduating already, and those will be covered. We come back to that in a few minutes. These are 4 countries currently: Angola, which had recently been extended. It's Bhutan, Sao Tome and Principe, and Solomon Island. We see here on this graph with the bubbles that all of them meet at least 2 criteria. We see Bhutan and Sao Tome actually meet 3. We also have Angola that meets 1 but meets the income only threshold and therefore is eligible for graduation. Then we have 2 countries that the CDP has already recommended in the past, but where the decision is had been deferred by ECOSOC, which will then look at this issue again this year. So the CDP had recommended Tuvalu for graduation in 2012 and Kiribati in 2018. The committee reiterated the recommendation, so it's no new with the reiteration of the existing recommendation. It highlighted the importance of longer preparatory periods in the current situation, and also reiterated calls for special international measures to address the extreme vulnerability of these 2 countries for climate change. The next important new set of results are those countries that have been found eligible for the first time. So that's again 5 countries. So we see again there is progress towards graduation. We have Cambodia, Comoros, Djibouti, Senegal, and Zambia, who all meet 2 of the criteria, with the exception of Cambodia that even meets 3. All of that for the first time. So then the normal process starts. The CDP will consider these countries for a possible graduation recommendation at the next triennial review in 2024, if, and probably that may be a big if in case of COVID-19, if they remain eligible, because their CDP identified clearly risk for some of these countries that they may fail meeting the graduation thresholds. There is also a clear need to carefully monitor the development of these countries vis-a-vis the LDC criteria and this new supplementary graduation indicators, to actually be aware how they are heading, whether they can be considered for a recommendation in 2024. And then as the third part, the CDP highlights that it's important to encourage these countries to build knowledge on graduation and its possible impacts, and create awareness about the issues in the coming years while monitoring, and also while the entities like UNCTAD and DESA start their preparation of the mandated additional information. Now to the big issue already looked at before, those countries that had been considered by the CDP for recommendation in 2021. 5 countries had been considered: Nepal, Timor-Leste, Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar. And as already highlighted by the chair, Jose Antonio Ocampo, there are 3 basically main horizontal recommendations made. One is this extended 5-year preparatory period for those recommended for graduation this year, and this is due to COVID-19. He highlighted already that the committee will analyze at the next 20 triennial review if that is sufficient. And then there's also this improve of the monitoring system that was already highlighted, and tests will continue later, where the CDP will pay special attention to COVID-19 impacts and alert ECOSOC if action is needed. Then we would move to the more specific recommendations, and then tests would continue with that.
Tess, you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thanks, Matthias. Building on his last slide, I will now briefly discuss about the decision on graduation and the triennial review 2021. This year, as already indicated, the CDP reviewed the cases of 5 countries for graduation, namely Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, Nepal, Timor-Leste, and Myanmar. And having reviewed the performance of these countries in terms of the criteria for graduation, and taking into consideration other additional supplementary indicators as highlighted by Matthias, including the current COVID-19 related economic social crisis, the committee has decided to recommend the graduation of 3 countries, Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, and Nepal, and defer the decision on graduation to the next triennial review in 2024 in the case of Timor-Leste and Myanmar. In recommending Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, and Nepal for graduation, the committee emphasized the point that these countries are graduating at a time of global pandemic and economic crisis, which makes continuous support for these countries absolutely essential, and engagement by development trading partners in their development moving forward to ensure that they continue to sustain the momentum that enables them to successfully meet the criteria for graduation. Extending access to relevant international support measures for an appropriate period and supporting them to address challenges arising from the COVID-19 shock will be essential for their development trajectory in anticipating the tremendous challenges facing these countries as they embark on post-graduation development, while at the same time recovering from COVID-19 shock. The committee recommended an extended, as already highlighted, preparatory period of 5 years. In the case of Timor-Leste, the committee decided to defer the decision to the 2024 triennial review due to continued concerns about the sustainability of the country's development progress, especially in view of the low oil prices and the limited progress in economic diversification. And similarly, the committee decided to defer the decision on Myanmar to the 2024 triennial review due to concern on the negative impacts of the state of emergency declared by the military on Myanmar's development trajectory and graduation preparation. The committee is unable to conduct in full the review that it usually does to reach a decision on graduation. Next slide. Now, I will say a few words on the monitoring of graduating and graduated countries that Matthias mentioned. One of the important activities of CDP is to monitor progress in countries that are recommended for graduation and those that have already graduated from the LDC category. The objective of monitoring graduating countries is to assess whether the development momentum that enables them to meet the criteria for graduation is maintained, and to establish whether they are on track to leave the LDC category at the end of the preparatory process. Through such monitoring mechanism, the committee will be in a position to alert ECOSOC should a graduating country requires additional preparatory period due to, for example, unforeseen developments such as the COVID-19 shock or natural disasters. Similarly, the CDP monitors for a specific period the progress in countries that have already left the LDC categories that have graduated to ensure that there are not setbacks or falling back into the LDC category. Now here, one point I would like to highlight is that the CDP monitoring work has increased significantly in recent years, in line with the increase in the number of LDCs meeting the criteria for graduation, and also those that are graduating from LDC that are graduated from LDC category. Learning from recent experience, the ADC has proposed ways in which the monitoring mechanism could be improved, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Next slide. Now, regarding graduating countries, the committee has monitored the growth and development performance of 4 graduating countries, as you can see: Angola, Bhutan, Sao Tome and Principe, and the Solomon Islands. With the exception of Angola, the other 3 are on track for graduation. And as you know, the GA has granted Angola an additional preparatory period of 3 years at the country's request, and the CDP welcomes the decision by GA. The CDP monitoring of graduating countries has highlighted certain issues that require closer attention by both the graduating countries and their development partners. For example, concerning about the debt sustainability, the limited development of product capacities, the need for economic diversification and investment in human capital development. Of course, addressing also the impact of the COVID-19. Next slide. Regarding graduated countries, the committee has monitored the growth and development performance of 3 graduated countries: Equatorial Guinea, Samoa, and Vanuatu. These are countries that are implementing or starting to implement their smooth transition strategy, although to date, it seems that none of these countries have submitted their report on the implementation of the smooth transition strategy. The committee is concerned about the impact of the COVID-19 shock on these countries, particularly Equatorial Guinea, which has experienced a sharp decline in income due to low oil prices and the intensification of inequality. The fact that the economy is totally dependent on oil and economic diversification is limited is also a major concern highlighted in the report. Next slide. Now, let me say a few words about what CDP is proposing for consideration of member states in the forthcoming conference. As a committee mandated to work on LDC-related issues, the CDP wishes to share with LDC and their development partners a set of ideas coming out of its work as an independent expert group. In this respect, the CDP wishes to submit 4 sets of proposals as inputs towards the LDC's preparatory process and the deliberations to formulate the program of action for LDC for the decade 2021-2031. The first one is on productive capacities, and Matthias alluded to this issue. Actually, the first time CDP proposed this idea to LDCs was in the 2020 CDP plenary, after the plenary meeting. And it comes out of CDP's extensive work during 2016 and 2017 on this issue. The first time linking product capacity with sustainable development goals, and the second time exploring the link between product capacity and graduation. It came up with this concept of expanding productive capacity for sustainable development and propose to LDCs and their development partners to consider it as a possible framework for organizing the next program of action. And it did that for 2 reasons. First of all, its research and analysis shows that the root cause of many LDCs, even those graduating, is a limited development of their productive capacity. Productive capacity, as you know, is broadly defined. It's about the competencies, capabilities, infrastructure, institutions, development of agriculture and other areas, digital and other new technologies that the country needs to be able to produce progressively more sophisticated goods and services, and that it could sell competitively in international markets. So in a way, it's the way CDP defines product capacity, which is derived from definition that used by UNCTAD, is, if you like, a proxy for development. So CDP believes that LDCs and their development partners really should consider the possibility of product capacity for sustainable development as a framework, because it will help them to focus the type of actions that LDC should take in the coming decade, and also to identify the type of policies and support measures that they need to move forward and graduate with momentum, and avoid these anxieties and worries that LDCs experience the moment they're about to graduate, because the capacity to produce wide range of products and services are not developed. Second reason is that LDCs and their development partners have already recognized the importance of product capacity, because in the Istanbul Program of Action, for example, is identified as a priority area, one of the 8 priority areas. But what the CDP is saying is that the product capacity for sustainable development is much more than just simply one among many priority areas, because it encompasses many of the other priority areas identified in the program of action. So it could be used as a framework. It's also easier to monitor if the program of action is shaped with this concept of product capacity, because of this index developed by UNCTAD to monitor the level of development of countries in terms of product capacity and how they are progressing. The other set of proposals comes from the COVID-19 study that Matthias highlighted. And the CDP, in addition to submitting the report for consideration of member states as they prepare the next conference, would like to single out various ideas and suggestions, and Matthias has already mentioned them. One of them relates to vaccine, in the spirit of not leaving anyone behind. I think distribution and accessibility of vaccine is critical, because COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis is first and foremost a health crisis, and solving the economic problems will start by tackling the health side. So access to vaccine by everyone is going to be important. So CDP hopes that this will be given serious consideration, including learning from the experience of COVID-19 that has stretched the public sector, the public health and LDCs because of lack of investment. In most countries, the spending is very low. So this is also another area that should be looked into in terms of supporting LDCs to prepare better for next pandemic by investing in their public health. The other area is already really touched in the previous discussion, and Matthias has looked at it as well. It relates to the worrying trend we're seeing in LDC on debt deterioration, and 1 or 2 countries have already defaulted or about to default, and many of them are sort of reaching debt distress point. And this is extremely worrying at a time when they are expected to start the recovery from the COVID-19 shock. And this is when they need cheap finance, or at least low-cost finance. Therefore, I think this is one area that needs to be looked into. And as the recapitalization of multilateral banks is one area that was mentioned, which could really help these countries access to the type of finance that they need to start investing in the recovery. Support for structural transformation is, again, as Matthias touched it, related to the whole process of productive capacity building. Structural transformation is a process that shows qualitative structural change in economies as they move into sectors and areas where they can add value and use technology and show progress and diversification. So I think this is an important area and linked to the findings of the COVID-19 study. CDP would like to highlight that. Next. The other set of proposals, the third set of proposals that the CDP would like the next conference to consider and endorse, hopefully, involves improving the monitoring mechanism for graduated countries. As I highlighted a minute ago, this is an important process. And as the number of countries reaching a graduating point or meeting the criteria for graduation and graduating increases, the need for monitoring is intensifying, and learning from experience, and the CDP has proposed a set of ideas that it wishes members to look at them and endorse and support. It includes, as our chair mentioned, a mechanism to trigger finding crisis before they become too late, or crisis reach a point where solving them is difficult. This will help graduating countries to be alerted, and if additional period is required for preparatory or support for CDP to alert ECOSOC. So the number of ideas proposed, but what the CDP would like to do is submit these ideas in the next Asia Pacific Regional Review for consideration by that meeting, and hopefully to be forwarded to the conference and for consideration by member states. The fourth area involves improved support measures for graduating countries. Increasingly, we are seeing that as, again, the number of LDCs meeting criteria for graduation increases, as they are preparing for graduation, there is a concern about post-graduation development trajectory. They are concerned that withdrawal of international support measures may create setback in their development. The CDP believes that this period or post-graduation development process needs special attention and improved support measures for these graduating countries as they prepare to leave the LDC category, and also after they graduate for at least specific period should be given serious consideration. And the committee would like to present this proposal in the Dhaka meeting, regional meeting. Related to that, the CDP has come up with this idea of creating a graduation support facility. The facility is not going to be a new entity. It does not require creating new institutions. It's just simply utilizing existing competencies, tools, technical cooperation support programs by different UN and non-UN organizations, but coordinating it better to support graduating and graduated countries to benefit in a more systematic way. For example, CDP is approach OECD, which has a very interesting, productive transformation policy review mechanism. And this is very useful for graduating countries, and OECD is willing to collaborate with CDP. This would be useful. And outside the UN system, like Overseas Development Institute, which monitors regional trade negotiations, is willing to support. In addition to that, of course, usual UN agencies from OCHA RLS, which has the interagency task force, plus the technology bank on technology, plus UNCTAD that works on many different areas from debt to trade facilitation and product capacity. So the idea is through this facility to coordinate the work of all these organizations in support of graduating countries. And the CDP would like to propose that so that it's considered for decision in the forthcoming conference. Let me stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tess and Matthias, for this very detailed overview of what has been discussed by the CDP plenary this week. I'm sure that was quite a bit to absorb, and there might be some questions from the floor. So I would like to take this opportunity to open the floor to all participants to see if they have anything to ask. And if so, please do so by pressing the green hand button, I believe it is, on the top of your screen. Thank you.
Canada wishes to speak.
Please, Canada, go ahead and.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. At the risk of monopolizing this conversation, I wanted to again thank the committee members and the Secretary for this time and for what I found to be an enormously helpful presentation this time. So thank you to both of you. In fact, it took a number of our questions off the table right away. So thank you for that. And we look forward to digging into the presentation. I guess I have three questions for you. The first, what do you take from the fact that no country was found eligible for inclusion for the first time? Obviously, COVID would be an enormous factor here, but did your analysis point to any other, did you learn anything else here, I guess, in digging into this? The second question is around monitoring, and
These are progressing if it is hanging on one overarching sort of goal, if you like. Although this framework includes all the issues that for example, in the IPOA, the LDCs have included in that work program of action. Maybe Jose Antonio could add to it.
You're muted, José Antonio.
I was saying that I think the explanation was very good. I really have nothing really to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Tesfaciu, for the excellent explanations, and Matthias as well. We have 3 minutes left till 12 o'clock, and I understand that we have still a question coming from Bhutan. If that's correct, please take the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. Firstly, thank you for this very informative and insightful briefing on the outcome of the plenary discussions of CDP. We were very much looking forward for the comprehensive study, especially given the impact that we are feeling. And then even in terms of the outcome, that the fact that no country was found eligible for inclusion and the 5-year preparatory period given itself speaks for the extent of the impact on the LDCs. I have 2 questions. First would be a kind of a clarification. Maybe I failed to understand clearly. The statement that there was no country found eligible or inclusion vis-a-vis later in the presentations that 5 countries in fact met the criteria for first time was quite contradictory. Maybe I failed to take the full picture. Maybe a clarification on that because 2021 plenary indeed found 5 countries. So there, and the other one is in terms of the post-graduation and smooth transition support measures. We all know in several past reports, the mainly SG's report on the implementation effectiveness and added value of smooth transition measures in graduation support, which was passed by GA resolution in 2018, makes concluding that these are not enough. Graduations are more than a mechanical process. The countries need to be reassured of more time-bound, concrete international support measures. Now, again, yes, we have heard CDP's outcome that this needs to be looked into. So we were just thinking we had all these past same kind of discourses coming now and again. Now we are really looking forward. And then perhaps CDP, if you could maybe suggest some kind of actionable, some doable suggestions that the LDCs or member states can take on, perhaps maybe in terms of their 3 areas, trade, development assistance, and general support. Maybe we should now expand the time frame, like GA resolution has different time frames for different support measures, like 3 years and 5 years. So perhaps it's time now, maybe we increase that so that LDCs get more assured of these support measures. What would be the most concrete doable things? Because we have heard the same discussions now for several years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bhutan. I very much like your last points there. What is there actionable and doable, and how can this be done? I will leave that to Mr. Tesfaciu to respond on what the CDP has in mind. But maybe first to your first question about 1 country for inclusion and 5 identified for the first time. I believe your interpretation is correct. If that is enough of an answer, I hope it is. But that's what was presented. And if so, would like to ask Tess to reflect on that other point about smooth transition and concrete support measures and what the CDP has been discussing there. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. No, this is a good question, and thank you very much for raising this issue. And you are right to say that CDP has been highlighting this point. And again, to reiterate that as the number of countries meeting the criteria for graduation and preparing for graduation and then reaching the smooth transition period increase, this need for additional support or continuation of existing international support after graduation for a reasonable period is becoming an urgent issue. Member states themselves are doing something about it. First of all, we should recognize that. For example, in the context of WTO, the LDC group, I'm sure you're aware, in Geneva submitted a set of proposals in December. The General Council discussed it, and they are still considering it. They didn't dismiss some of these proposals, including 12 years extension for some of the waivers and special differential treatment that LDCs receive in the context of WTO. So that 12 years after graduation, instead of now negotiating, each country negotiating for a specific period. And CDP is looking into a possibility of either additional or not necessarily new, but improved support measures. And also the possibility that once a country has graduated and going through the smooth transition period, and the strategy it developed should be shaped by more specific international support measures, because by then the country has identified where its comparative advantage lies, the areas where support is needed. So we're looking into that to propose, because sometimes the problem is that saying that the same international support measures that the LDC had access to should be extended as a blanket sort of extension beyond graduation may not be that helpful, because some of the international support measures are relevant for some countries and not others. For example, the duty-free, quota-free market access, in the context of WTO, the TRIPS agreement is absolutely critical for Bangladesh. And these issues may not be a game breaker as really essential for Tuvalu or Vanuatu, another country. So the possibility of smooth transition strategy involving more targeted international support measure needs to be looked into. And I think perhaps also the development partners may find it more logical if during negotiations they are asked to give support in specific area because that particular country needs the support in that area. For example, for Bhutan, energy is very important. Moving forward, backward-forward linkage related to energy, that kind of support will be more useful and very relevant than perhaps as a type of international support. This is the area that CDP is looking into.
Thank you very much, Tess, for that detailed answer to the question from Bhutan. As I started today, I said there's a lot of material to absorb, and there might be all kinds of questions from delegates that they would like to raise. And I would offer here that the CDP Secretariat is always there for you to respond to any questions and queries. Our email address is quite simple. It's cdp@un.org. That's how you find us, and that's how we will respond, and we will always be happy to do so, especially many of the issues related to graduation are quite technical. Now, before closing the session and thanking everybody, I want to turn to our chair and see if he would like to make any closing remarks. Mr. Ocampo?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the very detailed and clear presentations by Mr. Tesfashu and Mr. Brunker, which I think have given clarity about what we have discussed. Let me say that we really look forward to particularly to our participation in LDC 5, the preparations, and then in the LDC 5 itself, and for our proposals to be taken into account in that process. We understand this is of course, a process that is managed by member states, but I think some of the ideas that we have been putting on the table will be interesting. And of course, we will continue to do our job in following up the cases of LDCs, which ones can graduate, then do a monitoring of all countries, which is a fantastic task that the Secretariat does, and which is the basis for our discussions in the committee. So thanks also, of course, to Mr. Molero for the excellent moderation of this and the previous panels. And I look forward to continue collaborating with all LDCs in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, for those kind words. I echo all those thank yous to you, to Mr. Tesfaciu and colleagues, to start with Matthias, who presented, but also all the others working very hard in the background. It has been a busy week. Above all, also thanking all the participants, the delegates and others, international organizations that work so very well with us on these important issues. Thank you. Wishing you an excellent weekend. And also my last thank you, as we always do, to the interpreters who were here with us this morning. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the Friday and a great weekend. Goodbye.